Welcome, everyone. Welcome to our third episode of EnergyBin Insights, the webinar series that explores solutions for PV repair, resale, and recycling. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're so happy to have you here with us. My name is Renee Keel. I'm the Director of Sales and Marketing here at EnergyBin. And just to be sure that everyone knows who we are and what we do, EnergyBin is an online business community for solar professionals who are committed to accelerating a robust and sustainable secondary market. Our members collaborate via trade, networking, and educational activities like this webinar. The focus of today's presentation is to help demystify sustainable solutions, specifically how a circular economy model can address the sustainability needs of the community, planet, and economy. Before we jump in, please note that you may pose questions as we go. Many thanks to those of you who have submitted questions ahead of time. We'll have time to answer those questions following the presentation. Also, a recording of this webinar will be available on energybin.com, and the link to today's presentation is posted in the chat box already, so you can take a look at that. All right, well, our guest speaker today is Peter Perrault. He's the Senior Manager of Circular Economy and Sustainability at Enel Green Power. Peter is leading Enel's efforts in North America to transform the business toward an inclusive circular economy and to develop sustainable solutions for Enel customers. Peter has 15 years of experience working on all sides of the table as a sustainability practitioner. Welcome, Peter. We're thrilled to hear from you today.
Thank you very much, Renee. Appreciate the introduction. Let me just pull up my slides here and we'll dive right in.
Perfect.
Is everybody seeing that?
Yes, we can see that.
All right, excellent. Well, hello, everybody. Thank you again. My name is Peter Perrault. I'm the head of circular economy and sustainable solutions for Enel North America. Quickly just run through an agenda of what I'd like to go over today. I will provide a little bit of context about the Enel Group, where we sit globally, what it is we do, and then we'll kind of hone in a little bit on the North America region and really dive into the basics of circular economy. As Renee said, I'd kind of like to demystify it for those that aren't as familiar. And then we'll spend a little bit more time on Enel's model for circularity and how we approach the circular economy and the transition that we're all trying to undergo. Finally, I'll wrap up with some examples from our various business lines. And then hopefully we have plenty of time for Q&A. So thank you again, and please do enter those questions as they come up.
Yeah, great.
So for North America, who is Enel? I like to tell people that in the US and Canada in particular, we're one of the largest companies you've probably never heard of. We have, we're the #1 producer of renewable energy globally, with about 50 gigawatts of capacity around the globe in renewables. We operate in about 32 countries. We have over 65,000 employees, as well as a very large demand response portfolio of about 6 gigs. We have 5 different business lines, and I'll dig into that a little bit. So global power generation, it's pretty straightforward. We do have some thermal generation assets, but we are transitioning towards 100% renewables. Our global infrastructure and networks group is very large. We have enough transmission and distribution lines to run from the Earth to the moon 4 times. We also have our global energy and commodity management group, formerly known as Enel Trading, that takes positions within the energy markets, hedges, things like that, fulfilling contracts. But we made a conscious decision to change that name from Enel Trading to energy and commodity management because of the strategic approach to circular economy that we are taking. And I'll get into that a little bit more in the following slides. We do have a retail arm. It does not operate in North America, but where we are a utility in several countries such as Italy, Spain, Brazil, and other parts of LATAM, Romania. And then finally, there's our NLX business line, which is really primarily focused on B2B and B2G, with a bit of e-mobility that is also straight to consumer. And that's focused on digitization, electrification, and decarbonization solutions for those B2B customers. I'll get into greater detail on that in the near future. But I wanted to first start with this slide, which is Enel's purpose. Several years ago, we established that open power for a brighter future is our purpose. We want to empower sustainable progress. And circularity is very much a part of that discussion and that purpose. If you think about the UN Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs, circular economy directly relates to at least 9 of those 17 SDGs. And at Enel, we truly believe that sustainability equals value. It's not greenwashing. It is not just a nice to have or a feel good. It is core to our business and our purpose. We put our money where our mouth is as well. So when we look at the UN SDGs, our group CEO, Francesco Starace, is actually on the board of directors of the UN Global Compact. And we've made public commitments to the long-term value creation that comes out of committing yourself to sustainability. And you see here on the right-hand side of the screen, our plan for the next few years. And ESG, environmental social governance, is really the backbone of how we operate our business. We are very people-centric, but we see value creation in a just energy transition. And circularity is very much a enabler of that and an accelerator of that in our strategy. And when I say that we are committed to this and we put our money where our mouth is, you'll note that we are the first company globally to issue an SDG linked bond to the tune of about 1.5 billion euro in 2019. And what that's saying to the market is, we're not just talking the talk, we're going to pay you a premium if we do not achieve these sustainable development goals. We're one of the first 5 companies globally to issue science-based targets for emission reduction. We have since ratcheted those up, accelerated them at least twice since it was first approved by the World Wildlife Foundation and the SBTI. So we want to phase out all of our coal generation in the next 6 years, be fully decarbonized and net zero, not just carbon neutral, by 2050. And we want to make sure that we align that with the climate science, right? This is a crisis. We understand it. We want to be part of the solution. And we very much see open power for a brighter future as our purpose. In response to all that, the markets have noticed, right? We have an outstanding position for any environmental social governance ratings. The slide's a little bit dated, but if I had the 2020 update to it, the numbers would look just as good. So whether it's MSCI, FTSE for Good, the CDP, formerly known as the Carbon Disclosure Project, you see that we perform very, very well, and the market recognizes that. So investors take notice of your sustainability performance, and it has rewarded us quite handsomely. We've been listed on the Dow Jones Sustainability Index for the past 16 or 17 years, as an example. And so it's core to our strategy. It's core to our ethos as a company. I, as the head of circular economy for North America, have about 15 counterparts that are focused on circularity in other countries, and we are part of an ecosystem of about 300 plus sustainability professionals within the company. And so it's not just a one-man band trying to do all this stuff. It's not sitting in the PR department. We are core to the company, and our head of sustainability for North America reports to our CEO, and our chief innovability officer, which is innovation and sustainability, reports directly to the group CEO. And so there's a high level of visibility, and it's core to our strategy. With that overview in mind, let's dive into who Enel is in North America. We have 3 main business lines in North America. We operate in all 50 states. We've got about, I think, 70 plus power generation assets, utility scale power generation assets in roughly 16 states. We're also in 2 Canadian provinces. We've got about 1,500 employees. We're looking to double that workforce in the next year. And our US headquarters are in Boston and Andover, Mass. We have a large presence in Oklahoma City, Lenexa, Kansas, and then on the West Coast as well in Washington and Silicon Valley. And I touched briefly on those 5 business lines within the group. 3 of them operate in North America. We are an independent power producer, or IPP. We do not own a utility. We do not own transmission and distribution lines in North America. But the NLX business line is very prominent, and our energy and commodity management group is also quite active in the markets. So again, what do we focus on? We're trying to foster a just transition for the energy sector. And that starts with decarbonization, but also electrification of things like transportation, and then digitization, making sure that data and information is usable and accessible, and we can gain insights from it. And always keeping a customer-centric focus on what the evolving needs of customers are. The energy market is very dynamic. The US market in particular is probably one of the most dynamic. It changes state by state, region by region, and we want to ensure that we're enabling our customers to meet their sustainability goals and also address the challenges that are faced sometimes in the energy markets. Let's dive into circular economy now. This is my real bread and butter. The pitch is over. A lot of folks ask, what does circular economy mean? And what we're talking about is moving from a linear economy of take, make, use, and waste to one which is truly circular. And this slide is from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, and they highlight 3 primary principles of the circular economy. And even shorter than the brief amount of words you see on the slide, I heard someone from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation this week at the World Circular Economy Forum use 3 bullets. It's eliminate, circulate, and regenerate. And I really like that because it's simple. The concept or the language is fairly new in the business sector, and particularly in North America. But the concepts have been around for generations. I can remember my grandparents talking about waste not, want not, right? And reusing things. And if you're familiar with Amory and Hunter Lovins, they did a lot of work on natural capital back in the 70s. William McDonough started the Cradle to Cradle Institute in the 90s, I believe it is. And the principles make a lot of sense, right? We want to design out waste and pollution. I think it's critical to remember that the circular economy and the principles of it start at the design phase of things. A lot of people hear circular economy, they think waste and recycling, but it starts at the design phase. And then once you've designed out waste and pollution from materials and assets, you want to keep those products and materials in use for as long as possible. So you want to increase the utilization, you want to extend the life of those assets or those materials. And then ultimately, the goal is to regenerate natural systems, create ecosystem services, support biodiversity, and really regenerate the planet, which is in a crisis mode with climate change right now. Okay, and so that's the sort of high level concepts around circular economy. But a lot of people ask, what does it mean in practice? How do I translate this into what I do as a business? And this graphic here is from Philips, and they are a member of the Capital Equipment Coalition, which was convened by the Platform for Accelerating the Circular Economy, or PACE, which Enel is also a member of. And I really like this graphic because I think it demonstrates very clearly how we are moving from linear to circular, right? Having said that, again, people hear circular economy and they think a lot, well, why does an energy company care about circular economy? Isn't it about materials? The quote that you see here is Jean-Marc Ollinger is a managing director of Accenture Strategy. And they found that $500 billion of value is at risk in the next decade for the energy industry if we do not adopt a circular mindset. And while in the US, the concept seems relatively new, you're starting to hear about it in business and industry. Several other countries, such as Italy, where Enel is headquartered, is on its 4th or 5th policy iteration right now. And as part of the Green New Deal that the EU has passed, there's a circular economy action plan that's being developed right now. In light of COVID, I think that's either even further evidence that we have to strengthen and make our value chains more resilient, more local, making those loops smaller and smaller that you talk about in the circular economy. And it's conversations like this that are going to foster continual improvement. Finally, what does that look like? How do we get to outcomes? It starts with developing a strategy, and I'm going to go into Enel's strategy very shortly, but then you also have to engage externally. One thing that I tell people is that the circular economy is not working in a vertical, in your own little box. You have to work across industries, and really you have to adopt an innovation mindset as well, training your people and putting systems and processes in place that are going to help you to execute on that. So again, in North America, the language is relatively new, I would say, for many businesses and many companies. But there are examples of policies that are in place. I mentioned Italy having its 4th or 5th round. We've just started to see this year extended producer responsibility laws passed in Maine and I believe Washington State, and we can expect to see that increase over time. A much more simple way to think of it is everybody's familiar with, bans on single-use plastic bags, right? That's a circular policy perspective that counties, states, even cities are taking. But the challenge is in North America, we don't have a comprehensive policy in place. In February of last year, a senator from New Mexico and a representative from California introduced some legislation that may establish the baseline for a national strategy, but it's not quite there yet. So regionally, action is being driven by consortiums, groups like SEIA, Energy Storage Association. I mentioned the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. They're really moving from industry-specific issues to broader, more overarching topics, right? That could be wind turbine blade recycling, end-of-life issues for battery energy storage systems. And again, cross-industry collaboration, I think, is going to be critical, since there's standards being developed right now, and there's KPIs that are being fleshed out to measure and manage this. But it takes a village, if you will. Having said that, major companies and investors are taking note of the circular economy and the transition to an inclusive circular economy. I think that the social aspect of circularity and how we can be just and equitable in this transition is critical, particularly in light of a lot of the social issues that have surfaced, maybe existed for several years, but surfaced more recently in the last year or two. It's important that everybody has a seat at the table, right? And the theme across all of these efforts is the intent to quantify common metrics across different industries. And so as we look at groups like the WBCSD, who are developing circular metrics for corporations, for products, for services, WBCSD, for those that don't know, is the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. And they were part of the initial group that worked with the World Resource Institute, or WRI, to develop the GHG, or Greenhouse Gas Protocol. We are highly engaged, Enel, as a company, with them on several different fronts, but the Greenhouse Gas Protocol is sort of the go-to way to measure your climate impact and emissions impact. The Plastics Leak Project, which NLX was also a part of, it was a multi-stakeholder initiative co-founded by Qantas to develop the first science-based methodology to map, measure, and forecast plastic leakage across the value chain. And so as you look at all these companies, the breadth of companies involved, consortiums are driving action, but large companies are taking note. And once large companies take notes, they're going to trickle down those requirements and those targets and goals to their suppliers. And so it's important to be on board. It's important to be aware of how you're measuring your circularity and coming up with a strategy to improve it over time. With that framework in mind, how does Enel do it? This is our model for circularity. We call these the 5 pillars of the circular economy. You've got circular or sustainable inputs, which is probably most germane to this group here, right? For, what are we sourcing from renewable sources? What is manufactured with renewable energy? How do we reuse materials as sustainable inputs? How do we use more recycled content in those inputs? And if you look at on the wheel here on the left-hand side, you'll see the gold arrow shows those 3 pillars, the 3 principles, right? Of eliminate through design, circulate through optimizing the use, and then regenerate through value recovery. But we identify 5 pillars because there are these business models that you see here, things like product life extension, which directly relates to organizations such as EnergyBin, frankly, right? Sharing platforms, which also relates to EnergyBin. You have a very circular model, Renee. I give you credit for that. But also there's product as a service, this concept of leasing assets, so that we don't have to build more stuff, but if the producer of the asset owns it and operates it, the user of the asset gets the benefit. However, the producer has an incentive to maximize the output of that asset. And then ultimately, we want to create new life cycles. We don't talk about end of life very much at Enel. We talk about new life cycles. How do we maintain the value through upcycling? Recycling is sort of a tertiary, let's say, output that is better than waste. Obviously, it's better than landfill, but we want to regenerate and create new life cycles. And so how do we go about measuring this, right? We've got our 5 pillars. In 2018, we actually developed what we call our circularity model. You heard me say innovability before. Enel loves our portmanteaus, where we combine two different words, because innovation and sustainability go hand in hand, and circular economy and sustainability go hand in hand. And so this is how we start to measure and define these 5 pillars. So it's really important to think, what is the percentage of efficiency in the manufacturing process of a piece of equipment or asset that we're using? How much of that asset is coming from reused or recycled materials? What is the percentage of renewable energy used in the manufacturing process? These are all things that we are actively working on as a company. That energy and commodity management group that I talked about before is currently measuring all of the material inflows and outflows of the Enel Group globally. And we have a target to improve the circularity of the company as a whole to 80% in the next 9 years. So it's really core to our strategy, and that means engaging with all aspects of our value chain. So when we look at a value chain perspective, you can see where the 5 pillars fit in. The circular inputs and new life cycles are sort of material inflows and outflows that I talked about. How do we influence the inputs and outputs of the products that we are purchasing or manufacturing for ourselves to enable the circular transition for customers? But then along the bottom, you see, there's different business models that I mentioned, product as a service, sharing platforms such as EnergyBin, and how do we extend the life of products? How can we potentially design those products for modularity so that if there's a single point of failure, we can replace that part rather than having to replace the entire asset, right? And our NLX business line has a lot of enablers for this. We offer renewable energy advisory services, which obviously improves the sustainable inputs or circular inputs for companies. We offer software as a service. We have demand response, which is really perceived to be a sharing platform of your demand to provide grid resiliency in the energy markets. We offer hybrid PPAs to customers where we own the assets with solar panels and battery energy storage systems, but then there's a shared benefit to the customer when they bid into capacity markets or demand response markets. And then we also offer product take back to ensure that all of our customers and vendors, or excuse me, not customers, but customers and partners, aren't left with the burden of having an asset when it does reach its end of useful life. And we try to find those new life cycles for it. And the way that we go about this is really looking at all aspects of the value chain and asking ourselves, how do we improve the circularity? We have these 5 pillars that are sort of our guiding principles, but in the design phase, can we increase the amount of circular or sustainable inputs? How do we work with our vendors and suppliers to ensure that there's greater recyclability of products or greater recycled content going into those products? And I'll go into a few examples of that. What is our supplier selection process? Can we execute, ensure that environmental product declarations and codes of conduct are being met by our suppliers? Because ultimately in the value chain, your scope 3 emissions tend to be quite large, and scope 1 emissions are direct emissions. You can think of the smokestack or the tailpipe, right? Burning fuels, be it natural gas in your offices or diesel and generators or whatever else. Scope 2 is indirect emissions, being purchased electricity, steam, district heating, things like that. But then scope 3, which is value chain emissions, is everything else. And that includes the embodied carbon of physical assets. And so not producing a new piece of equipment is always going to be preferred because it's a reduced environmental impact. But then there's other questions around, how we engage with subcontractors, how we're operating our operations and maintenance for equipment and assets. Can we influence the use of a particular asset? And then ultimately, how do we ensure responsible product take back, recycling, upcycling, second life opportunities? And there are several opportunities. So we're talking about risk reduction. I mentioned innovation, but there's new revenue streams that can be generated as well. And we can reduce our environmental and social impacts when we take a circular mindset. And so with that in mind, I want to jump into some examples. What are the focuses of our business lines? I mentioned suppliers. We have what we call our circular procurement project. I am a member of the Sustainable Procurement Task Force for North America. And that works across all of our business lines to engage with suppliers and identify the opportunities we have to become more circular. On the power generation side, it's really looking at our assets and the value loops. How do we create new life cycles for assets, for materials? And can we identify nature-based solutions? The NLX business line, as I mentioned, we are an enabler or accelerator of circularity for our clients. And then I'll also call out that there's a special focus on circular cities for Enel, because we want to provide a vision of cities of the future, because we know that that's where economic activity is taking place. We also know that's where consumption is taking place. And so it's critical as we see more and more people moving to cities. We see cities generating more and more of the global economic value, that we have a special consideration for how cities are operating and trying to design a circular city of tomorrow. And of course, there's digitization is what enables this across all of our platforms. So I'll jump into a few examples of each of these. We do have, as I mentioned, a circular and sustainable procurement strategy. It starts with engaging our suppliers around what we call a K factor, or technical K, which allows us to actually provide a commercial offset up to 4% to suppliers that can meet certain sustainability criteria. And so if you can tell us that this asset was generated with or manufactured with a certain percentage of renewable energy and your competitors can't, we're going to credit you with a commercial offset in that tendering process. Where we are working towards is defining those metrics and impacts of all the physical assets. And so that comes with what's called environmental product declarations, or EPDs. And this starts with the life cycle assessment of the physical assets. So as I mentioned, embodied carbon, embodied ecotoxicity. What are the environmental aspects of impacts of me owning this asset? Right, that's going to fall into that scope 3 bucket again. And then ultimately we go back to innovation. How do we co-innovate with our providers in order to improve the circularity of the physical assets that we are purchasing, which will in turn reduce our environmental impact and footprint? So where are we at in this journey? We launched it about 3 years ago. We started to look at different product categories. And so when you look at life cycle assessment, you can then receive an environmental product declaration from that manufacturer. And then we establish what are called PCRs, or product category rules, within the company. So we're looking at everything from PV panels, wind turbine blades, smart meters, trackers, all of those assets. We're developing product category rules to say, okay, you're not allowed to use, let's say, cadmium telluride in this piece of equipment, because we know that that is environmentally detrimental. We are not going to purchase it from you if you have that in your asset. And we've established this protocol, and our target by the end of the year is to have over 60% of the equipment that we purchase fall into our product category rules and provide us with EPDs. And so where's our progress? This is a little bit dated. It's the end of 2020. But you see that we have 17 environmental product declarations that have either started the validation process or are currently available to us. And you see that we're developing other PCRs for cables, transformers, EV charging stations, and other pieces of equipment and assets. And this is, again, that target of circularity, that target of improving to an 80% circular platform for an energy company starts with the equipment and the assets that we purchase, and looking what's within them so that we can manage those scope 3 emissions and then ultimately reduce them. So it's a little bit of a carrot and it's a little bit of a stick for our suppliers, right? We want to incentivize them. We provide the commercial offset, but we're also saying at a certain point, we're not going to do business with you if you can't meet these requirements that we have, because we are firmly committed to our sustainability goals. To put a bow around that, what we're really talking about here is moving from what's commonly referred to as renewable energy to truly sustainable energy, right? We want to move from fossil fuels to renewables, obviously, but we want a fair and just energy transition. It's commonly known that individuals that suffer the most from the adverse effects of climate change are those at the lower spectrum of the economic, system. And so we need to be just. We need to implement job training and employment skills for repairability, modularity. We need to provide equitable access to renewable energy. And we want to really create shared value and improve the total societal impact of our operations as a company. And we do that by leveraging the circular economy and looking at what we call our sustainable pillars. So procurement, how we design our plants. Again, circular economy starts at the design phase. But then also how we go about construction practices. How do we ensure that we have sort of performance-based standards for what we consider to be good and best practices in this construction phase? How do we operate those plants, and how do we ensure that they're also being decommissioned in a responsible manner so that we ultimately provide that land back to the landowners or communities in as good, if not better condition than when it was received? Because we want to regenerate natural systems, one of those core principles. Mm-hmm. So with that, I've got just a couple more examples for you here. A project we did last year with our knowledge partner, Wrapup, who is a large built environment engineering design firm and really just smart global leader on the circular economy, looked at the future of solar power. And what we did was we looked at the 5 principles of circular economy that Enel has established as our pillars. And we examined a solar facility that we actually have in Texas. And we interviewed stakeholders from EPRI, NREL, a number of nonprofits and others. And we said, what does the future of solar look like? And for us, it is what we call dual use solar. So 2 different uses for the land, not just producing renewable energy, but providing those ecosystem services that are going to regenerate natural systems. And we identified several changes that we wanted to make from a programmatic perspective. Our pipeline right now, I mentioned we had, I think 6 or 7 gigawatts of installed capacity in North America, but we want that to be like 3x in the next 3 to 5 years. And so if we're going to do that, we have to programmatically approach this with the circularity mindset. And we helped develop a tool to improve those environmental outcomes associated with owning and operating these solar assets. And what we also identified was that Envision, which was created by the Institute for Sustainable Infrastructure, is an excellent guideline for us to look at. And we are actually pursuing Envision for the facility that we looked at. It's sort of like LEED for infrastructure assets. So if you're familiar with LEED for buildings, a LEED certified building, same thing for infrastructure assets. And really what we are trying to do is engage with communities, provide those ecosystem services to landowners and maybe adjacent farmers in the region where the solar facility may be, and ultimately regenerate those natural systems and ensure that our footprint is minimized and the environmental impact is a positive one. Different example from the wind industry. We have engaged for over 1.5 years now with the Rewind Network, who's looking at the issue of wind turbine blades at their end of life and how do we manage that. It's pretty widely acknowledged that there is going to be a lot of wind turbine blades decommissioned, and to have those go to landfill would be a real challenge. So the Rewind Network, which is spearheaded by some folks at Georgia Tech, as well as University College Cork in Ireland, Queen's University in Belfast, and CUNY, have been studying this. A bunch of mechanical engineers, structural engineers, architects, folks much brighter than myself, and they found that grinding blades, using pyrolysis, all these things are maybe not the highest and best use. And because of the structural integrity of fiberglass, which is the primary component of wind turbine blades, maintaining that structural integrity is the highest value. And so we're doing a demonstration project with them. We have a half-scale demonstration at Georgia Tech right now, and we hope to launch a full-scale demonstration next year to repurpose those wind turbine blades as transmission and distribution poles for new T&D lines that are going to be needed as part of this energy transition. Really cool stuff. Excited to see it progress. But this is another prime example of where sustainability and innovation work hand in hand to develop these circular outcomes. Yeah, I mentioned a special focus on cities. Happy to say that we are a member of the Circular City Coalition, which was convened by Pixera Global, a wonderful international nonprofit. And we are the official knowledge partner for the Circular Chicago Coalition. I mentioned an inclusive circular economy and a just energy transition. And why this concept is unique is it's looking at the traditionally disadvantaged or underserved communities of the south and west side of Chicago. And we're trying to imagine a future where Chicago becomes a paradigm for the circular transition. And so happy to play a part in that. And if anybody is interested in learning more about circular Chicago, circular cities, we can certainly follow up offline. My contact information will be available. We're also working with them in New York, looking at how we reimagine economic growth for New York City, partnering with the Economic Development Corporation, which is a quasi-government group in New York, looking at the Navy, the Navy Yard in Brooklyn, and how we can reimagine over 95 acres of land for mixed-use facilities in a circular mindset, because we know that it's critical to again electrify transportation, but provide economic opportunities for people and regenerate those natural systems in areas that might have otherwise been overlooked in the past. So I know I ran through a lot. I'm sorry, I talked pretty fast. I'm from the East Coast.
Have a drink of water.
But there's plenty of information out there online, or we can follow up offline directly with me. I do want to mention the Marshall Plan for Middle America, which was developed by Professor Marshall at the University of Pittsburgh with support from the Enel Foundation, is really looking at that Ohio River Valley and Appalachia region and how we reimagine it with a circular approach. Enel has published 3 this fall. You'll see the 4th edition of our Cities of Tomorrow paper. We have a paper out there on dual use solar and the work that we co-authored with Arab. And we also published our first position paper for North America this year, where we address everything from policy and how we build back better, recovering from the pandemic, recovering from all these natural disasters that we have had in the previous years, and build a more resilient and regenerative future for North America. So thank you all very much. And Renee, I'll let you fill me in if there's any questions.
Yes, I will. Thank you so much. That was excellent. And I just have to say to the group here that this is my second time going through the presentation. And the first time I had 2 pages of notes, and now the second time I have 2 more pages of notes. So excellent. Thank you so much. It's just, it's awesome. It's awesome work that you're doing. And I loved that you said waste not, want not, because seriously, every visit to my grandma, that's like what she said. I think that was her motto. So that's awesome. We do have a lot of comments and questions, so I'm just going to start going through them. If you had a chance to rest your voice and get a drink of water there. Okay, so one question is, why don't we see you in Boston, or do we? Is in Boston?
Well, I work remotely.
Okay.
I work remotely in Rhode Island, but NLX is our main office in Boston, the Boston presence. We actually recently reached an agreement with the MBTA to help electrify the transportation system. And so we're deploying electric buses in Boston, in the city of Boston. We also have a charging station set up for them. UMass Boston is one of our partners as well. We deployed solar panels on the roof of their parking garage, coupled with battery energy storage, so that they could bid into demand response markets and tied to EV charging stations that are accessible for public use. We have a similar model out on Martha's Vineyard with the VTA there, the Vineyard Transit Authority. We do have a strong presence in Massachusetts, but we are primarily a B2B company, right? So the NLX business line, if you're not actively engaged in that, you may not have heard of us, right? But we do have an office right there at 1 Marina Park Drive in Boston, in the seaport, and then our NL Green Power headquarters are in Andover.
That's awesome. You said something at the beginning, didn't you? Like you're the largest company that nobody's ever heard of, or
at least here. If you live in Italy or Spain or Brazil or Colombia or Peru, you've certainly heard of us. But here we're an independent power producer, right? We don't own a utility yet, so you know, it's a little less common than say Eversource or National Grid or one of these companies that's, you know, people are receiving monthly bills from.
Right, that's awesome. One comment was just, that's amazing on the product category rules. So that was one of the comments. We've got a lot of good talk. Somebody's looking for the recording. Yes, we will get that out to you. And actually the slides are posted at the start of this chat. So everybody who's on can go take a look at that link. Another question, how important is the general population's learning to think in terms of circularity?
I mean, it's critical, right? I said we have to work across industries from a company perspective, but there's a behavioral change that needs to take place as well, right? The linear model that we have been following for over a century is more stuff, more stuff, more stuff, right? And so as individuals, we all have a part to play. And, I often tell people we need to kind of meet our audience where we're at. You might not think circularity when you go to eBay and you purchase a used sweater or something like that, but that's an example of circularity and sharing platforms and extending product life, right? We don't have to go to the store to buy something new every time. We can share items with our neighbors. For example, my manager, as a matter of fact, was telling me his old neighborhood in Massachusetts, they created a battery sharing program for their yard equipment, right? So that everybody didn't have to buy a battery plus a backup battery or a third backup battery to get their lawn done. They had a few chargers at somebody's shed, and they could just borrow them back and forth. That's circularity in action, right? And it is critical because we have to retrain ourselves to say more stuff, more stuff, more stuff, or throw it in the trash, or even throw it in the recycle bin, right? You can reuse a lot of items, you can repurpose them. And so it is critical to have that mindset change for the common individual, but it doesn't necessarily have to be this term circular economy, right? There's refuse, reduce, reuse, repurpose, recycle, all of those things fall into play as well.
Sure, right. Awesome. Okay, have you had any pushback from site operators who have to maintain the recycled equipment or dual use sites or other unconventional approaches? Sometimes this approach can be perceived as extra work squeezing the O&M budget.
No, we haven't. In fact, I would say that you can, with proper design, you can reduce O&M because you don't have to necessarily mow as much. You don't have to mow as much land. And as long as the design is right, you can see potentially reduced costs. One of our dual use approaches in Minnesota is using sheep as grazers. So we move paddocks around these locations, and the sheep graze on the native vegetation and pollinator friendly vegetation. So you don't have to mow, right? And they're with proper thinking up front, those types of solutions are possible. And in fact, in terms of the ecosystem services, we're starting to see a market for ecosystem service credits around soil nutrients and things like that are actually getting financially valued, and they're fungible assets, sort of like a renewable energy certificate. We're seeing a growing market for that. And so the key really comes with design. A lot of people, the leading edge panel is the leading edge of the panel is supposed to be 20 inches or 24 inches off the ground, and a lot of that vegetation would grow above and beyond that, and so the maintenance would be difficult. But if you plan for that in advance and you plan out where your vegetation is going to be, or if you're looking at agriculture and agrivoltaics and crops that don't grow very high, you might get a better albedo on the underside of a bifacial solar panel, for example. And we're starting to study the albedo boosting effect of different crops in certain parts of the world. And so we don't get pushback because I think it's very much a part of our ethos, but it does take proper planning up front, and that design you have to get that right.
Right, get that right. Yeah, makes sense. What cities are in the Circular Cities Coalition?
So right now, the coalition itself is, we are actually one of very few businesses that are a member of it, but it's really the entities that are trying to help foster a circular transition. So we are actively engaged with Cleveland right now. There's conversations going on with Cambridge. There's New York that we're working with the EDC, Chicago, as I mentioned. But any city can participate, and we would love to engage with any and every city. There's other entities out there that are also looking at circular cities. There's the Resilient Cities Catalyst, which spun out of the Rockefeller Foundation several years ago, that is working with Pittsburgh and the folks in that Appalachia, Ohio Valley region. There's other cities like Charlotte and Denver that have engaged with really smart entities like Metabolic over in the Netherlands to try to improve the circularity of their cities. But the coalition in and of itself is actually folks like Pixera, like Reaply, who's a great circular startup out of the Chicago area, SAP, second largest software company in the world, Enel, and closed loop partners in Volans. We are this coalition right now, and we are trying to engage with cities. So if you're working at a city, you live in a city, you want to get engaged, certainly reach out, and we're happy to have those conversations.
Okay, that's wonderful. We're getting a lot of questions. Do you have a more time here, Peter? Can we keep going?
Okay. Yeah, fire away, please.
Okay. Okay. How would educational and behavioral change occur, and at what levels in the life cycles of human living across the population? And what will these implementations involve educationally and as cultural change, which is often managed?
Teach the youth, start them young.
Yeah.
We actually, in Enel, we have what we call We Are Energy, which is a program to engage our employees' children in different sort of educational challenges. And this year, the theme of the challenge was called reciprocity, and it was around circular cities. And so the earlier you start them, the better, I would say, because again, we've trained ourselves in this linear model. We need to relearn or unlearn and then learn a circular model. You know, and I think that, Renee, you and I talked about like our parents, our grandparents saying things like waste not want. I remember, you know, my grandparents were part of that generation during, you know, World War I and World War II, where you had to save everything. You saved all your tin foil, you saved your plastic bags, whatever it may be. And at some point, you know, societally, I think we lost that in some ways, right? Because there was economic growth, there was greater prosperity, and we just said new stuff, disposal, convenience, all these things are great. Well, now we're facing a crisis for the climate, for the planet, with waste, right? And we need to relearn that and rethink that. So I think, you know, start now, start yesterday, start engaging with kids early on, and you know, children's clothing is a prime example, right? Everybody wants to buy the new baby, new clothes. And those clothes fit for about what?
Right. Sometimes
3 months, 4 months, 6 months?
Yeah, right, yeah.
You know, and so it's like, refuse new clothing.
Right.
Get clothes from, you know, those kids are gonna grow fast. And it's a child. They do not need a brand new pair of, you know, a Gucci sweater that's going to fit them for 5-6 months, right? And there's easy education and lessons to be learned from a parenting perspective, I think, when we look at that.
I love that. Yeah, that's awesome. Battery question. When will we see battery collection across the nation's cities and institutions, do you think? And because we do not yet see that today.
So their e-waste is definitely an issue. It's something that is pretty well addressed, I would say, by the electronics industry. I remember I was working for a tech company in Silicon Valley back in the early aughts, and you know, there was legislation passed in Europe. It was called We and Reach, which was all around restriction of hazardous substances. Well, that's ROSE, but then also that extended producer responsibility. There's places, you know, if you're familiar with Best Buy, you can drop off your batteries there and they will recycle them for you for free. You don't need to make an appointment, whatever else. Regional areas, I know for myself in Rhode Island, we have regional drop-off areas, and then they also do periodic collections where they set up a station where you can go drop off things like chemicals or batteries or whatever else. I think, you know, if we're talking about battery energy storage systems, like the big assets, we're starting to look at second life applications for EV batteries from cars as stationary storage, because the performance profile, the load profile is different. So it might not still be able to suit an electric vehicle, but it works perfectly well as stationary storage. And so, you know, nationwide, I want to see a nationwide policy and strategy. And I think business in general does, because it provides clarity, right? Businesses don't inherently want to do the wrong thing, but when there's regulatory uncertainty, it makes it more challenging for them to know what's expected of them. Sure. Right. And so, you know, I'm not sure where the question came from exactly, but again, places like Best Buy, I'm not sure if Staples does, but there are outlets to recycle batteries. And again, there's intrinsic value in that, right? You want to recapture that material and maintain the value of those materials, because we know that because of geopolitical reasons, the supply chains that are extending into certain parts of the world are going to get disrupted. whether it's natural disasters, whether it's geopolitical issues. And so we need to become more resilient by making those loops tighter and tighter and more local.
Yeah, absolutely. We just had a comment to this from someone that said they were getting solar on their home, and the solar salesman told them that the residential storage battery is failed EV batteries.
That's great. I mean, it's, you know, because the load profile and the demand on that battery is very different. And we have our first demonstration we did used Nissan Leaf batteries. It's in Melilla, Spain, which is just off the coast of Northern Africa, actually. And we deployed I think it was 4 or 5 megawatt storage system with old Nissan Leaf batteries. And it's helping back up one of our thermal generation plants, actually, and providing that grid resilience to the region, which is otherwise decoupled from the rest of the electrical grid.
Right. Yeah. Amazing. A couple more questions here. How will farmers become part of the renewable energy economy? Won't they ordinarily enjoy new revenue sources from generating clean, green, renewable electricity on their land? But many US and Canadian farmers farm from power grids, though they are microgrids and could be better transmission design.
So I mean, that's a great question. I think there's a few different examples. You know, when Enel generally in North America, we are leasing the land where our power generation assets are. So for solar, we are leasing the land. We have agreement with landowners that are getting that sort of annuity, that revenue of us leasing the land that we own and operate the power plant. Additionally, there's those ecosystem services that are provided by dual use solar. So if you plant native vegetation that is, you know, drought resistant, it's regenerating the soil and nutrients in the ground, but also providing pollinator habitat. Those pollinators then go and pollinate adjacent farmland and the crops. And so we see a benefit from that as well. In terms of, you know, I mentioned we use sheep for grazers, and that provides shepherds a revenue source. And there's companies out there that are actually developing models where they will pay solar developers to graze the land for them based on the weight that their herds grow from feeding off of that land. And so there's these really neat dynamic sort of ways in which, you know, they call it the food, energy, water nexus, right? How all of these things kind of come together. And in terms of powering farms, particularly larger industrial farms, we are large supporters and enablers of distributed energy resources. We have to rethink the electrical system in the US, no doubt. It's very fragmented. It's very fractured. It's aging infrastructure, and we envision distributed energy resources as being sort of the future, right? And what we're seeing with programs like demand response, but also in other aspects of the economy, a prosumer model where you're no longer simply a consumer of a good or a service. You can actually play back into that market. And I swear this isn't a setup, but EnergyBin is a good example, right? You might have purchased a bunch of equipment or have a bunch of spare parts, but then you can in turn be a prosumer and sell that back and earn revenue from that. And I swear Renee did not plant that for me, but it's true. Demand response is a great example, right? You're going to pay me to reduce my energy demand? That sounds like a pretty good deal, you know? And so we started to see more and more of those models. Again, paying farmers for farmland, those sorts of things. And the ecosystem services and regenerative nature of our approach.
Yeah, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. How can political candidates be forced to engage with these issues of circularity, do you think?
I don't know if forced is the right term, but as you say, you got to meet people where they're at. And I know, you know, I just had a conversation with the chief sustainability officer from a city in the Midwest, and they said, you know, they're on board with the circular program, but their constituents care about jobs and economic growth. And that's why Enel and several others talk about a just transition for the energy sector, and it has to be inclusive and it has to be equitable, you know. And so a politician, let's just say broadly, may not be too familiar with the term circular economy, but they're certainly in tune with the term being more resilient. they're certainly in tune with job training and economic development, right? And so when you couch a discussion in language that makes sense for your audience is where I think it's going to be most effective. There are leading state legislatures. There's EPR bills that got passed in Maine and I believe in Washington. California just passed the Truth in Recycling law, right? Which is because you see that little triangle on a whole bunch of things that when they go to your municipal recycling facility, they can't really handle it, right? And so the Truth in Labeling law that they passed, I think was excellent because it's education. It's also responsibility that has to be taken on by the companies. Those are all circular examples, but none of them are called the Circular Economy Bill of 2021, right? And so, you talk about jobs, you talk about training, education, resiliency. Those are things that I think any political representative understands and can get behind. The message doesn't have to be circular economy and circularity, but you're driving to the same outcomes.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, we'll go through two more questions here. Circular economy principles can take an anti-consumerism approach. You speak of a lot of great ways to still make a profit with this at your core. How competitive is this space getting? And is it all collaboratives and advocacy, or is there an emerging competitive environment?
That's an excellent question. We often engage in pre-competitive activities. So companies that may be a competitor for our products and services, we can work with to help address a problem or a challenge together. So pre-competitive relationships. I think personally, it takes collective action and across industry. Now, can circular economy be a differentiator that then makes you more competitive? Absolutely, right? And we've seen that throughout all of our business lines. However, there's not a direct, product or service that makes an entity circular, right? In and of itself. There's so many different aspects. If you think about the value chain, there's like 9-10 stages of a value chain. And in some areas, there's going to be competition. In others, there's going to be collaboration. But we all have to work together. And so we try to help enable greater circularity for our customers. On the flip side, we might talk to our customers and look for them to help us solve a problem, And so I think that there's more companies taking notice. I think that there are some great startups out there like Reaply. TerraCycle is pivoting now to Loop Store. There's a whole host of companies out there that are looking at bio-based solutions for packaging and compostable materials and things like that. In the apparel industry, there's a whole bunch going on, whether that's Allbirds or, Adidas making sneakers out of fishing line that they pulled out of the ocean, and so I see it more as a differentiator than being competition in a pure sense.
Sure. Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. Last question. Can Enel or others lease characteristics of the land, but not the agricultural characteristics of the ag land? Would the electricity operator need to own the land? And how about Enel's prioritizing growing edible plants as a more ecological input to the society?
So we do lease our land in North America. We make payments to landowners to own and operate the assets that are on their land for 20, 40 years. So yes, we can certainly lease. And yes, we are looking at agrivoltaics and food crops. We actually are planning right now to extend an engagement with the DOE and NREL at a facility in Texas where we're going to test different crops and understand which grows the best in the shade of PV panels or which provides the most albedo or reflectance on the underside of bifacial panels. We have several demonstrations going on in Australia, Spain, Greece, and elsewhere where we're growing crops. Also, those pollinator-friendly crops that are growing, we are harvesting honey. There's a company I think called Bear Honey up in Minnesota that they're selling their honey for a honey ale or lager to one of the local microbrewers. They were just highlighted at a Disney World World Food event or something like that. And so yes to agriculture, yes to food, yes to leasing land. all of those things are possible.
Great. Oh my gosh, this is so amazing. This is so much information, Peter. Thank you so, so much. I think we had a couple of other questions hanging out there that I'm going to connect you with some people and make sure everybody, and your Peter's information is available to you guys too. Your contact information is there. So we just want to say thank you so much. Thank you for being here, for sharing this wealth of information with us. To learn more about the work that Enel is doing, you can visit their website at enel.com. Is there another place we want to direct people, Peter?
That's the best place to start. You can also go to nlx.com. You can go to enelpower.com, but you'll get there from enel.com.
Sure.
And again, please feel free to share my contact information. I know you're sharing the slides and the recording, but folks are welcome to reach out to me directly as well.
Yeah, great. That's wonderful.
And thank you for having me.
Yes.
Today, Melissa,
so
in the background there.
Such a great discussion. We love it. If anybody else would like to be a guest presenter on a future EnergyBin Insights webinar to discuss a solution for PV repair, resale, or recycling that you do have experience with, feel free to send Melissa Schmid a topic proposal and a presentation outline at melissa@energybin.com. And of course, we would love to have all of you join our EnergyBin community. To find out more, visit our website at energybin.com. Also, please connect with us on social media, as well as sign up for our newsletter to stay informed on upcoming webinars and other secondary solar market resources. So thanks again for joining us. I have to tell you, Peter, we just got one last comment that said very good in all caps. So
thank you all very much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks again for joining us. If you have any additional questions or you're looking for more information on EnergyBin or Enel, just please let us know. We're always happy to help. Thanks, Peter. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Take care.